There are very few shows in television history that managed to turn a Friday night time slot into a genuine cultural institution. Friday nights are traditionally where networks send shows to die: low viewership, distracted audiences, tough competition. And yet, for 6 consecutive seasons on ABC and then 3 more on Fox, Last Man Standing did the impossible. It drew millions of loyal viewers week after week, built one of the most devoted fan bases in modern network television, and became a rare bright spot in an era when traditional family sitcoms were struggling to survive. So when characters started disappearing, when familiar faces were suddenly replaced or simply gone, audiences felt it personally. It wasn't just a casting change. It felt like losing a member of the family. The real story behind why those characters left is layered, complicated, and far more revealing than a simple press release ever let on. To understand the cast departures, you have to first understand how the show came to exist at all. Tim Allen had walked away from weekly television after Home Improvement wrapped in 1999. He had spent 8 years as Tim the Toolman Taylor, and by the time it ended, he was one of the biggest stars on television. Walking away from that kind of platform takes confidence, and Allen had it. He spent the following years doing films, doing stand-up, living his life outside the weekly grind of network TV. Then, in 2011, a script landed in his hands. The show was called Last Man Standing, created by Jack Burdett, and it centered on a rugged, politically conservative outdoor sporting goods executive named Mike Baxter who was perpetually outnumbered by the women in his household. Allen said no. Then he said no again. By the 3rd time he turned it down, something shifted. The network offered him something unusual, not just a starring role, but genuine creative authority. He would be an executive producer with real input into the direction of the show. That was the detail that changed everything. For a performer who had spent years feeling like a cog in someone else's machine, the promise of ownership was irresistible. He signed on, and when the show premiered in October 2011, over 13 million people watched. It was ABC's biggest comedy debut in years and immediately established itself as a dominant force on Friday nights. The first major cast disruption came quietly, but it sent shockwaves through the fanbase once it became public. Alexandra Chando had been cast as Kristen Baxter, Mike's eldest daughter, a young single mother who had her son Boyd at 17 and was working as a waitress while trying to piece her life together. The character was raw and grounded. Chando brought a naturalistic quality to Kristen that made her feel genuinely real, a young woman figuring things out in real time, fumbling through responsibility with a mix of sharp humor and honest vulnerability. Her dynamic with Allen was one of the show's early highlights. But after the first season wrapped, ABC announced that Chando would not be returning. The official explanation was the familiar industry shorthand of creative differences, a phrase that almost never tells the whole story. What was actually happening was a deliberate decision by the show's producers to reimagine what Kristen's role in the series should be. The writers wanted to shift the character away from her identity as a struggling young mom and towards something more politically engaged, a more mature woman whose worldview could push back against her father's conservatism in sharper, more substantive ways. To achieve that tonal shift, they felt they needed a different actress in the role. There was also a visual consideration that the producers were candid about internally. Alexandra Chando was actually younger than Molly Ephraim, who played Mandy, the middle Baxter daughter. Having the eldest sister look younger than the middle sister created an unspoken awkwardness that the show's creators wanted to resolve. The solution was Amanda Fuller, who was older than both previous actresses and brought a more lived-in, assertive energy to the character. Fuller stepped into the role for season 2 and ultimately became one of the show's most beloved figures, carrying Kristen through pregnancy storylines, career pivots, and some of the series' most emotionally resonant moments. But the loss of the original Kristen still stung for viewers who had bonded with the character in her first incarnation. Around the same time the Kristen situation was unfolding, another casting story was playing out that captured public attention for very different reasons. In December 2011, Nick Jonas appeared on the show as Ryan Fogel's son, Kristen's ex-boyfriend and the father of her son Boyd. Jonas was 19 years old at the time and was at a transitional point in his own career, moving away from the Jonas Brothers era and starting to establish himself as an independent performer. His appearance was designed to generate buzz, and it did. But the version of Ryan that Jonas played was deliberately thin, a nervous, immature young man who had run away from his responsibilities and was only beginning to reckon with what that meant. The character worked as a plot device, but there wasn't much beneath the surface. When Tim Doyle took over as showrunner heading into season 2, his vision for Ryan was something entirely different. Doyle saw the character as an opportunity to create a meaningful ideological counterweight to Mike Baxter, Someone smart enough and confident enough to hold his own in genuine debates about politics, values, and the direction of American culture. That kind of character required a different kind of actor. Jordan Masterson was brought in to take over the role, and the transformation was immediately apparent. Masterson's Ryan was articulate, grounded, and ideologically committed. He wasn't a punchline or a cautionary tale. He was a full human being with a fully formed point of view, and his arguments with Mike Baxter became one of the show's most reliable sources of dramatic energy. Over subsequent seasons, Ryan's arc continued to develop in unexpected directions, including the darkly comic storyline of his cannabis business unwittingly transforming him into the kind of capitalist entrepreneur he had always opposed, much to Mike Baxter's unconcealed delight. Then came May 2017, and everything changed overnight. ABC announced it was canceling Last Man Standing despite the fact that the show was averaging more than 8 million viewers per episode and had been one of the network's most reliable Friday night performers for 6 years. The cancellation landed like a shockwave. Nobody saw it coming, least of all the cast. The timing made the news impossible to discuss without invoking politics. Just weeks before the cancellation, Tim Allen had appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live and made a provocative joke comparing being a conservative in Hollywood to living in Germany in the 1930s. The comment was widely discussed and widely criticized. When the cancellation followed so quickly, the connection seemed obvious to many observers. ABC's network president Channing Dungey pushed back firmly, insisting the decision had nothing to do with Allen's political comments or the show's conservative-leaning humor. The explanation offered publicly was that ABC was shifting its Friday night strategy away from traditional comedies and toward fantasy and science fiction programming. The cast was not consoled by corporate explanations. Tim Allen went public with his reaction, describing himself as stunned and blindsided. Nancy Travis, who played Vanessa Baxter, expressed genuine grief over the show's end and used her platform to thank the audience for years of loyalty. Hector Elizondo, who played Ed Alzote, was more pointed in his public comments, suggesting that political considerations may have been woven into a decision that was being dressed up in scheduling language. Behind the scenes, the financial picture added another layer of complexity. Because Last Man Standing was produced by 20th Century Fox Television rather than an ABC in-house studio, the network was paying a licensing fee of approximately $3 million per episode. That cost, combined with Tim Allen's individual salary of over $200,000 per episode, made the show significantly more expensive to air than comparable productions that a network owned outright. The fan response to the cancellation was extraordinary even by the standards of passionate television audiences. Within 24 hours, a petition demanding the show's return collected more than 400,000 signatures. Social media was flooded with organized campaigns. Billboards went up in Los Angeles and New York. People mailed toy tools to ABC's offices as a reference to Allen's handyman roots. State politicians weighed in publicly, with some suggesting the cancellation had been politically motivated. It was a level of grassroots mobilization that was genuinely unusual for a network sitcom. Fox Television, meanwhile, was watching all of this very carefully. The network had also noticed what happened when ABC revived Roseanne, another politically polarizing family comedy, and watched it draw massive audiences eager for content that reflected their own worldview. Fox smelled an opportunity. On May 11, 2018, the network announced it was bringing Last Man Standing back. The revival came with a $50 million commitment and a tight timeline. The announcement came in May, the premiere was scheduled for September, and everyone involved had to sprint. But revival meant confronting the reality that a year had passed and people had moved on. Molly Ephraim, who had played Mandy Baxter through all 6 original seasons, had not been sitting idle. She had signed on to multiple other projects, appearances in Brock Meyers, work on Halt and Catch Fire, and other commitments that were already locked in by the time Fox came calling. She simply could not extract herself from those obligations, and so one of the show's most popular characters had to be recast. The producer's approach to recasting Mandy was deliberately unconventional. Rather than searching for an actress who physically resembled Ephraim or who would try to replicate her specific comedic rhythm, they looked for someone who could bring something genuinely different to the character. They found that in Molly McCook. McCook looked nothing like Ephraim, and the show didn't pretend otherwise. The writers actually incorporated jokes acknowledging the change rather than hoping audiences wouldn't notice. The initial fan response was hostile. The hashtag #NotMyMandy trended almost immediately after the premiere, but McCook refused to be diminished by the comparison. She carved out her own interpretation of the character, leaning into Mandy's fashion ambitions and giving her more serious emotional material to work with. By the time the series entered its final seasons, McCook had won over a substantial portion of the audience that had initially resisted her. Caitlin Dever's situation was different in almost every dimension. Where Ephraim's absence was a practical obstacle, Dever's became a story about what happens when a supporting player on a family sitcom suddenly becomes one of the most sought-after young actresses in Hollywood. The ABC cancellation had freed her to pursue film work more aggressively, and she pursued it brilliantly. Her performance in Kathryn Bigelow's Detroit established her dramatic credentials immediately. Then came Booksmart in 2019, a film she co-led that became a critical sensation and a modest commercial success. Then Unbelievable on Netflix, the limited series that earned her Golden Globe and BAFTA nominations and firmly established her as a performer of the first rank. By the time Last Man Standing was back on Fox, Dever was no longer a TV regular looking for opportunity. She was a film actress managing an increasingly crowded schedule. The show accommodated her as best it could. Her character Eve Baxter was written into the Air Force Academy, a narrative device that gave her absences a logical explanation within the story. She appeared in 7 episodes of the revival's first season, then only 2 in the following year, then 3 in the final season including the series finale. The production team built entire episodes around the narrow windows when she was available, and the writers used video calls creatively to keep Eve connected to the family even when Dever herself was physically elsewhere filming other projects.